Hello and welcome to our 2022 live community conversation about our recent ILEARN results. My name is Kelly Marshall, and I am the Senior Vice President of Schools here with the Mind Trust. And I am joined by three of our amazing panelists, and I'll allow them to take a moment to also introduce themselves.
Good evening, everyone. I am Tiara Hollenquist, and I am the Interim Executive Director of Empowered Families.
Good evening. My name is Delma Super, and I am a parent advocate with Empower Families.
Hi, my name is Elia James Sanchez. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a parent of three wonderful young kids in elementary school.
Well, Delma, Tierra, and Elia, we are about to dive into our 2022 iLearn data. And to all of our the folks out there in the audience, please know that we want this conversation to be interactive. So as we move throughout the data slides that I'll be sharing, if you have a comment or a question, that we do have someone behind the scenes that will be capturing those. What we'll try to do is to get through all of this information is to share a set of slides with you, some information. Tierra will then come on, get some reactions from our panelists, and we're going to move through as quickly as possible, allowing enough time at the very end for all of you to ask questions that we will either try our best to answer or we can log and definitely come back to you with an answer. So let's go ahead and dive in. So why are we here? First of all, we know that a single test can't tell us everything about our individual students, but iLearn results can help determine a starting point, specifically for schools and our families, that can direct us into knowing what is needed for our students. It provides us with very important information. It helps us to understand not only their needs, but how schools and districts are actually serving our students. We're going to dive into some specific student groups tonight, but the iLearn assessments allow us to look at how those student groups, such as Black and Latino students, English language learners, are being served. So for those of us on this call tonight that really don't know or understand what iLearn is, on a super high level, iLearn is a standardized statewide assessment that's administered to students in grades 3 through 8, and it's administered in the spring, I'm sorry. Now it's gone through several different iterations, but for the 2022 school year and the 2021, we have been administering iLearn to determine how students are performing on grade level standards. The test is created with those standards in mind so that schools will have an understanding as to where those students are performing at that particular time of the year. Families should receive a report for each of their students who take iLearn. In addition to this report, families also have an opportunity to ask for rescore. And I know that now that rescore window is passed, but families should be getting this information from their child's school. The report shows you how proficient your student is in math and reading. Based on their scores, a student will either be in one of four levels of proficiency: below proficiency, meaning that they did not pass; approaching proficiency, they still technically didn't pass, but they're on their way there; at proficiency means that they are demonstrating the ability to perform at their grade level; or above proficiency, meaning not only can they perform at grade level, but there's enough evidence to support that the student can actually perform above their grade level. So when we look at a student passing iLearn at proficiency or above, the scores that you're mainly looking at are those scores of those students who pass both sections, the math and the ELA. So a school or district's pass rate is the percentage of students who passed both ELA and math. What we're going to do tonight is take an opportunity for you to look at how the students in Indiana performed, in terms of passing both parts, but then we're also going to break it down into looking at those specific student groups as well. When we talk about student groups, it's really important for families to ask those questions, not just to leave it there as to how a school or district performed overall, but you want to look at specifically how those student groups compared to the overall group, specifically your Black students, your Latino students, students qualifying for free or reduced lunch, your ELL students. So again, you want to be able to dig down into that data and to those specific student groups to really get a clear picture as to how a school or district is performing. So now it's time to dive into our statewide results. For 2022, the overall pass rate, and keep in mind that is looking at students who passed both the ELA and the math. In 2019, that's before the pandemic, 37.1% of the students in Indiana passed both parts. In 2020, due to COVID, it was considered a hold harmless year, so no test was given. In 2021, students came back to taking that test and only 28.6% of students passed. Now that then calculates into an 8.5 percentage point drop. So that's when everybody started talking about, the learning loss. We know that our students, lost a significant amount of learning. We also want to think about just the absence of learning. Our students didn't get dumb. They still had the same potential, but there was no information coming into them. In 2022, we were able to see a 1.7 percentage point increase for our statewide results, with 30.2% of students actually demonstrating proficiency in both ELA and math. So this year's small gains erased only about 20% of the proficiency decrease from 2019 to 2021. So an increase is good, but if the state continues to see an increase at this rate, it'll take nearly 4 years just to catch up to our scores in 2019, and those proficiency levels were just too low to begin with. So now I said we were going to talk about specific student groups. Again, I can't stress enough that it is not enough to look at overall results. We have got to clearly look at how each student group is performing. Tonight, we're going to look at statewide results for Black students. So if we saw in 2022, the students in grades 3 through 8 that are classified as Black, there was only an increase of 1.8 percentage points from 2021, coming in at 9.9% pass. For our Latino students, 17.3%, which is an increase of 1.7 percentage points from 2021. And for those students that qualify for free or reduced lunch, there was only an increase of 1.6 percentage points from 2021. So they came in at 16.6%. Again, we are excited to see that we're moving in the right direction, but as you can see, across all student groups, we're seeing under 2% percentage point increases. Now, if we look even closer at schools, the 11 districts within Marion County, this post was one of the most shared for the Mind Trust. And I know I'm going to zoom out so that I can see it. But for our independent charter schools, 16.1% overall percent passing. When we look across the map at Pike Township, Washington Township, Indianapolis Public Schools, you'll see how each of those 11 districts performed. Next slide. Now, when we take a look at the change over time, all but one school district saw an increase in their overall proficiency rate. Now, I do want to name that this is not a time for us to slam schools or districts. The purpose of tonight's call is simply just to acknowledge where we are. But when we look at this data, it is glaringly apparent that some districts are performing better. It is glaringly apparent that our independent charters are demonstrating better results, specifically for our student groups serving Black and Latino students. So, again, in 2022, the overall results, all but one school district saw an increase in their overall proficiency rates. As a whole, charter schools also saw increases. So now,
Wow.
yeah,
This data it just makes it very clear what is happening and how students are performing across the state, across Indianapolis. And so just to get just some thoughts from Doma and Elia, what are your thoughts when you look at the statewide data?
Well, my thoughts is like, what are the barriers that the Black, Latino, and those students who are receiving free and reduced lunch, what are the barriers that's keeping them from achieving excellence on these tests?
great question.
Yes, and for me, when I look at these numbers, and we're comparing from 2019 to what is happened today, just with the overall numbers, like we are still below that 37%. We're 7% points still away from where we were before the pandemic. So I'm a little bit, I'm happy that there is, a slight or increase from 2021. However, I still think that we have a long way to go before we get back to, pre-pandemic numbers, and it's important to look at why that's happening, especially for our Black and Latino students.
Yeah, those are some good points, Doma, about what is happening and why our Black and Latino students aren't thriving and aren't getting the same results as the rest of the students. And what do you all think about the Marion County civic pass rates?
Well, it's kind of brings you to the same question: why are other schools achieving and other schools lagging behind? What are those schools doing differently that those other schools are not? So, is there a blueprint that these schools have that other schools should kind of shadow? Like, what is happening here?
I mean, to me, it was shocking because, if you look at Speedway, for example, they were just way more ahead of the curve. I want to know what is going on there that is really working. And then also looking at charter schools, I thought, wow, there is a big difference in what they're doing, and I've personally been able to see that, just by the fact that I've seen more charter school engage parents a lot more. Um, and I think that there are definitely some things that charter schools, we need to look at what they are doing that are working.
Yeah, can you talk more about the engagement that you've seen? And is this ILEARN specific or is this in general?
Well, for me, I have really watched the Mind Trust and the charter schools really focus on community engagement, um, probably over the last like year and a half. um, I honestly did not know a whole lot about charter schools or the Mind Trust, until I really started looking at what options my kids had. um, I was at a point where I was at a private school that was not serving my student well, um, and they were not really, my students were not, or my kids were not really feeling trust. And I started to notice that, like, the engagement, there was not a lot of time for engagement of parents. And what I have seen over the last year and a half is a lot of engagement on the part of these schools, just out in the community and supporting the community. I've seen them at pretty much every single event that has happened, like every weekend for the last year, for example. And that says a lot about those schools. I've been paying a lot of attention to see what is the difference, what are they doing. They've been at every Latino event that I've been, um, out in the community. So I think that, um, they're partnering with Latino led organizations, for example, but I also see like they're finding these community gatekeepers as well, and they're engaging those gatekeepers and saying, okay, how can we better that relationship between the community, the parents, the students, and the schools.
Elia, you mentioned a great point, and it's that we can't begin to approach addressing this working in silos. It's going to take every single stakeholder group that is involved with educating our students to be knowledgeable first of this data and to work together in service of those students. And so, Delma, you talked about, like, were some of what's the playbook, right? Why is it that some schools, are knocking it out the park and others aren't? There's no magic pill. But I can say things like adopting a high quality curriculum that aligns students with, opportunities to practice with question types that are at that grade level. I like to use the term schools are loving kids to death in some cases, right? A student comes to you, they can't read, the teachers are doing, and most of them are doing their very best to love on our children, but not really understanding that loving on them doesn't mean not exposing them to how they need to perform. And we said it in the first slide. The test is not the only thing, right? But the job of a school is to instruct and to educate students. And if we are not doing our part as educators to give them opportunities to demonstrate what they can at their grade level, then we're setting them up for failure. And, we also want to name, yes, we saw increases, but increases back to 2019 where it was already low.
Yeah, some very powerful points are being made here about engaging parents and the community and teachers and how we're all in this together. And in order to improve these results, we all should be in communication about ILEARN, although it's not the only thing that is important. And there are so many different strategies and ways to be able to help kids learn. Do you all feel that parents are aware of the data and what is in terms of ILEARN, and what has parent knowledge looked like for you, Elia, and you, Delma?
I can tell you guys that I have, I'm always a proponent of looking at the data and making sure that my people are informed. I'm always, advocating for the Latino community, and one of the things that I always, challenge people on is make sure when we're sharing this data to also translate it in Spanish. And I was extremely proud, of the Mind Trust for, their blog that was actually translated in Spanish. I believe it was like, um, it's on the Mind Trust website. And what I loved about that was, initially when I went right away to Facebook. All of my Latino community is mostly on Facebook, and when I went on there and I shared the results, people were really engaging. And I was also telling people that as a community, we must keep looking at this data. This doesn't tell us everything about the student, like Miss Kelly was saying, but it does tell us, where people are at and how our students are doing, and what students are lacking and which students are not. So, I had a huge response on my Facebook from parents, and I think people think sometimes that like Latino parent involvement is very low, but that is definitely not the case. I think that um, especially when the things are translated in their language, they become a lot more engaged. And I think like what the Mind Trust is doing, where they're finding these you know like um, like I said earlier, these community gatekeepers to tell the story and keep talking about this. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and to add is that I think educating the parents on it and teaching them what they're reading, because a lot of times when I receive this information, it's like, okay, what should I be looking at? Why should this matter? Just to give me some context on how I can partner with the teacher and also help my child the best way I can at home. But I believe educating parents, teaching them, training them, and doing more setups like this. Not 2 weeks before ILEARN begins, but like months ahead of time, so that if parents are prepared, their children will be prepared.
Right. And
Also in a Latino family, oh sorry, in a Latino family, like decisions are made with the whole family together. So whether it's about going to school, which school they're going to choose, they are very engaged in those types of decisions. So I think that um, yes, definitely building those trusting relationships, like Ms. Delma said, um, and that requires understanding on both sides and teaching right on both sides. So I love what you said, Ms. Delma.
I think I also want to name that, yes, we're going to be talking tonight about iLearn results, but I don't want to put a bad taste in everyone's mouth about a test, right? If we, for those that of you that are familiar with iLearn simply just asks kids to think. And so when we look at this data, and yes, we're going to be talking about it in response to test results, but this is the outcome of how our students are performing and how their ability to think through problems, to think through questions. And so it's not about the test. It's about whether or not our students are performing at a level that is, encouraging them to be thinkers and processors so that they can continue to move on. So I did want to name that because the data we're about to dive into next is gonna, I'm sure, incite more conversation.
Thanks, Kelly.
So I said earlier we were going to start talking about the specific student groups. We had an opportunity at that first slide to look at the map of how those 11 districts were doing overall. Remember, the first slide talked about how students were in grades 3 through 8 performed in both ELA and math. When we look specifically at how our Black students performed, 13.5% of Black students in independent charters demonstrated grade level proficiency in both ELA and math. Now let's take a look back at those 11 districts and see how Black students performed. When we look at the top, independent charters, Speedway's still on top, Franklin Township. So they've found some kind of way, to Delma's point. What are they doing that helps them, to educate and to provide opportunities that can help our students better grasp that those test questions in those districts? And then when we look at the bottom down there are 3 districts that had proficiency point decreases from 2021 to 2022 for Black students. When we look at the student group, the Latino student group, for independent charters, 14.3% of Latino students passed. And then when we look at those across the map at how our Latino students are doing, we can see some school districts, have identified ways in which they can best support their Latino students. Let's look at how they did in comparison to last year. Again, 3 districts had proficiency point decreases or no change from 2021 to 2022. This isn't always the data that you see. And finally, the last student group that we'll look at tonight is our students qualifying for free or reduced lunch. For independent charters, 16.6% of students in grades 3 through 8 demonstrated proficiency in both ELA and math. And let's see how the townships did. Now it changed a little. So for our free and reduced students, we've got 3 groups at the top: Beech Grove schools, again, independent charters, and the school township, Speedway Township. But we still have 2 districts that had proficiency point decreases from 2021 to 2022. Now, if you've been paying attention to those slides, there's one school district in particular that saw percentage point decreases in each of the 3 student groups that we're looking at tonight. So let's go ahead, Tiara.
Yeah, what other reactions do you, Damo or Elia, have to getting more specific about the data and the student groups?
It looks like to me that COVID had some impact in some respects, but some schools didn't improve regardless. So there you go, back to the question: what is happening? And that's something we most definitely need to dig deeper into and find out what is the best solution to be able to help. And I'm glad that you did bring up, Kelly, that a lot of times we just focus on the test. Teachers just focus on the test. Parents just focus on the test. But what is the test actually designed for? Is for those critical thinking skills. So what kind of curriculum is being implemented to produce what this test is actually trying to assess?
You're absolutely right. And what if the test is the only time they see it?
So then that's a bigger problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, right away, what I think when I'm looking at, the numbers for Latinos, I always think about like the population growth trends too, and what are the long term implications for our economy and our social stability. That's going to depend on, in part, by addressing these issues of Latino educational attainment. Um, and I think that, personally for me, as a parent, what I want to see from my schools are a sincere interest, right, in my student. I want to see attention, and I also want to see understanding. And I feel that this builds trusting relationships. Um, but again, I also want to, what Miss Kelly said earlier, the quality of the curriculum is just as important, and having those high expectations of the students. Because I think sometimes they're like, people might think, oh, well, you know what, if they're not doing so great, then how can we make it, do we go back on our curriculum? Like, what do we do with our curriculum? And when I talk, like, for example, to the parents, to my cousins in Mexico, for example, their kids are, like it seems like they're 2 grades above my children's grade. Like they're, in trigonometry when in high school, when they're supposed to be, we're here, they're just doing like starting to barely do algebra. So I feel like, our kids can do it. Our kids can definitely do it. But again, what is it? What does it take to, um, you know, for them to perform higher? And I think, again, for me, it's that, like I said, I think the school needs to have that sincere interest. They have to show attention and understanding, not just to the parent, but also to the student. And I think that, together. just brings like culturally, creating a culturally competent school, and not just for Latinos, but also for the about the African American community and all the communities that we have in Indianapolis. We are very diverse.
So right now, everyone's talking about the teacher shortage. So when we look at this data and we think about, we know that, students respond to a teacher that has high expectations, that is there consistently, planned, prepared, and ready to deliver that instruction. So the teacher shortage that we're going through right now is completely exacerbating what we're already dealing with in terms of our student outcomes.
I agree that that is going to make it extremely tough, for the schools as well, because when I talk to a lot of the students, I get a lot of calls from parents just asking me to intervene at the school. And when there are problems, I mean, with any type of problem, fights, you name it, I always ask the student, well, how do you feel about your teacher? How do you feel about whoever they had that interaction, that negative interaction with? And they will like literally tell me, they will be very honest, like they seem like they don't want to help us, they seem like they don't understand us, they seem like, why did they ask me, Miss Elia, why did they choose their job, why did they choose this job, and so having less teachers is, and then also trying to work towards creating that more involvement in the teachers, and working with training personnel that work with specific populations. It's going to be tough, for sure. It's going to make it tougher.
What action steps are coming to mind after looking at this data?
I most definitely hone in on a thought process is revisioning education. And I think if we start there, I think we will start seeing the results that we need to see. Everybody doesn't learn the same. Everybody doesn't teach the same, but kind of having that global approach when it comes to education most definitely probably will give us the results that we're looking for.
I agree on that, with definitely with individual learning. When you talk about social relationships, and even with interactions, um, it's very important to hone in on that individual, and how they're learning and where they're at. And I can't stress that enough for the Latino community, because our community is extremely diverse. And for example, a child that comes from Honduras has had to travel through multiple borders to get here. And just that in itself, for the whole family and for that student, is already really tough. It's a traumatic thing that they go through. So understanding, like, not all Latinos are the same. Everybody gets here the same. It's not. You really have to um, hone in on those individual learners, and learn who it is that you have at your school.
So yeah, we're naming that it's a hard job, right? And we want to celebrate those schools and those teachers out there that are committed to this work. Um, and it's that we don't want to offend, we just want to name what is happening with our students, and the only way for us to improve is to name it. And so if there are teachers or school leaders, that look at this data and they're not charged by it, then you're right. Then maybe they don't need to be in the field, because we need people that are fired up about this data, fired up enough to continue this conversation, to look beyond what is being shared with us as just the overall results, right? As a state, we should have been up in arms anyway about 30% pass. Because if we think of it the other way, that means 70% didn't. And when we're
Right.
looking at 1 percentage point increase, We've got a ways to go.
And yeah, we're not trying to blame anyone, or we're trying to bring everyone together. And this is not just the only conversation that we're going to have. There needs to be more, because even before COVID, the data was under where it needed to be. And so we're trying to create this conversation so that everyone can be included and add their thoughts and add how can we work together, because this is an issue. And so how do we collaborate and work with families and work with all these different partners in order to create better outcomes for students? And that's the focus, is the student.
That's absolutely right. So I think, let's see, we've got, we want to be able to also equip those families that are on these calls or on our community call with us tonight with some questions that you can ask your school when you get back to them. What are my students' strengths? You walk into that building and you set the tone with that educator that you're talking with, so that they come from it with, these are the things that my student, that your student can do well. And then what are the skills that they're most in need of and more support? How can I help? What are the strategies that we can use at home? And what are the resources that are offered by the school, the community partners that students need to support in developing those reading and math skills? And one question that's not on there is, educator, can you assure me that my student is seeing on grade level material some point in time during the day? We can't hide behind an IEP, right? We acknowledge where the student is, but we offer them opportunities to practice with material that will help them think. And so now I think we've got some questions from our audience that we can start to begin to tackle. Do we know how Marion County schools compare to the state of Indiana overall? So if we go back to that slide, and I'm not driving, so that's really hard. But when we look at, let's go back to, we know that the state of Indiana was at 30 percentage points, right? Pass. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. So we've got our overall statewide results at 30.2. When we look specifically, now go to the map, Kateri. Overall, we can see how specific townships have done. Now, we've got some internal data that can talk to us about Marion County, but you'll see across these different townships where districts are falling. I also want to name too, when we talk about independent charters, those are the schools that have no affiliation with Indianapolis Public Schools. They're autonomous. They're working on their own. Next question. See, I'm the EL coordinator, instructional coach at my school. How can I get things translated into Spanish if we had limited adults who can translate? That is the problem that a lot of schools are having. The first thing I say is have a conversation with your school leader. It is not an if. Those students and families are entitled to it, right? And so if we at the Mind Trust can help you get help your school leader identify where resources are. But that question makes me almost wonder if they think it's an if. Students are and families are entitled to those translated versions. So if you're that EL coordinator, schedule that meeting with your school principal and say, okay, who do we need to reach out to? And those of us on the schools team have no problem being the first ones that you contact, and we can find you resources for that.
And also, let me say this. I know that we talked about finding, like looking for non-traditional ways, non-traditional strategies, or non-traditional ways to help. And I would say that's a big part of why you want to be involved in the community, and why you want to have those conversations, and that relationship. We have in our community the Colombian Association, who wants to just share their love for their culture. I'm sure if you reached out to them, they would love to help. We have the Peruvian Association. We have the Mexican Women's Association. We have a lot of groups out there. La Plaza, that I know, can also provide resources. And um, but also think about parent engagement. And if you find that one parent that is just so, that's willing to help, and that it is bilingual, then that's a gem. I was that parent, usually, and I was very willing to help for the betterment of the whole school. But I think that, start to think to help you, with some data. Look at the 2020 census. The 2020 census showed that the growth of the Latino population, the growth in the United States, 51% of that growth was due to Latinos, to the growth in the Latino community. So, find some stats, do a little bit of research before you talk to that administrator too, and say, what, this data is very compelling. Our numbers are just going to keep growing.
And just to add briefly is that it's a law that schools provide these resources for families. And a lot of times families don't know that this is a law. Legally, they should provide these resources for parents. But just wanted to add that.
And I want to say just one more really quick thing, that working just as a volunteer in schools, when I get these calls all the time. Um, for example, during the pandemic, I kept getting phone calls from parents that said, you know what, the teacher keeps calling me. My student has, I have COVID. My student has COVID. That's why she hasn't gone to school. But I cannot communicate this to the school. And so they keep calling. I think we're in trouble now because I can't communicate with the teacher, and I tell my daughter to tell the teacher, but my daughter is so shy. And we're talking about an elementary school child. That child is just not going to be prepared to address an adult that she maybe in her head thinks is going to get her in trouble. She's going to say the very least possible to that teacher, or it's going to be very difficult to communicate. I was that child. So it's so important to have these, to have language access at every school for that reason. Because remember, you're not speaking to an adult when you're speaking to a child, and there's a lot of things that they will not be able to share uh, as their children.
We had a couple questions. One, there was a question that put up that was taken down, but it was, Elia, you mentioned there were some resources here in the city of Indianapolis, and there was a question as to are those resources also available in cities such as Gary, Indiana?
Yes. Many years ago, I had the privilege of being the director of Latino of the Indiana Commission on Latino Affairs for the entire state of Indiana, and I can tell you that definitely there are organizations in Gary or near Gary that would, I'm sure, be willing to help.
We've got another question. Since research has shown that the most you can make up is one grade level, why are students who are 2 to 3 grade levels behind tested at grade level? The best answer I can give, Janae, is we have to find out where students are in their current grade. We have to have some starting point. I always like to think of it as it's not the test that I think we get most frustrated about, it's the accountability placed on the test. Testing isn't a bad thing. It informs our instruction, it informs our moves. But we have to it's the weight that's placed upon it, and oftentimes that's what schools are feeling. Schools, if especially now, since we're putting this data out about subgroups, I guarantee you school leaders right now are looking more intentionally at their subgroup data or their student group data. But to your point, in terms of if research shows that the capacity that you can build in a student is 1 year, and if they're 2 to 3 grade levels behind, the question is, we got to start somewhere, and not knowing is worse.
I would agree. What would happen if we just didn't talk about it? And we wouldn't want that world for anyone. So, yeah, I think it's good just to point it out, talk about it, create these conversations, and go from there.
Listen, we got a strong school leader on here. I hear you, Herbie. Herbie said we can make up more than 1 year. I don't think the caller that's on said that we couldn't. It's just that in general, in the event that a student is multiple grade levels behind. But Herbie, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. So if we have any other general questions, let's just keep those coming in. We've got time. This is great conversation, great discussion. And, even our school leaders that are out there, if there are points that you want to make sure that we drive home to our callers, because again, I want to name the reason for us exposing this data is to keep us informed. It is not to shame anyone. It is to acknowledge that we can't have school districts going backwards. We can't. We have to name that. But it is important for all of us to be informed.
So, Kelly, quick question for you. What can school leaders do to help parents understand this data or be informed?
Right now, if a school leader has not already put on their calendar to bring parents in on multiple points and touch points during the school year to talk about where they are, they need to do that right now. Take down your master calendar from your website and put those dates on there where you are bringing and inviting parents in to talk about where kids are. Schools across, at least across the Mind Trust portfolio, they all administer interim assessments. And those are those assessments that offer students practice at the question types and the thinking that they're going to be exposed to during the ILEARN assessment. And so an opportunity right there is, as soon as you get those formative assessment results out, those interim assessment results, bring parents in. Here's where your child is. How many times do we sit parents outside a door, sitting outside in the little chairs, and we say, you got 15 minutes, and we've given the scared little teacher the script to go through what they're going to talk about when that parent comes in there. Take some of that lift off the teachers, leaders. Bring those families in. Give them an overall review, just like we're doing right now. You can do this for your school. Take that same information and then equip your teachers, one, with the skills to address it, and two, with the skills to convey it.
Yes, I think having those conversations and bringing that up um, to at each school is really important, and talk about a way to engage parents more. Um, and just wanted to remind you, definitely if so for some of the schools that have a lot more Latino students, I think that maybe make it a two sessions so that the other parents are having to wait double time for the translation. Um, but again, I think the more that you engage with the parents, everybody's like, so how can a school engage the parents more? And this is perfect. This is definitely one way to start the conversation. I like what some of the things that I've seen in school, like where they limit the time to, like each parent has a limit of, I don't know, 5 minutes or 2 minutes, because that really keeps everybody on task. And um, so I'll also just be prepared and organized for that meeting.
I'm seeing some great things pop up here. First of all, celebrating and rewarding the teachers who are getting those results, those that are doing it right.
Mhm.
I saw another comment. I saw Tina Seymour talked about, how are we using our instructional assistants? We have this data right now. A large percentage of our schools do have those additional staff members, that they can leverage. Now, again, I know every school is different, and I do understand the teacher shortage, but that's why it's even more important that every single person in your building is utilized to support students. You're not hiring people that can't read. So then it's the opportunity is there for us to sit down and give them the resources that they need. It's all hands on deck at this point.
And I also wholeheartedly understand that students will succeed if their teacher can relate to them and look like them too. I saw that in one of the comments. I can tell you that I am 38 years old, and everybody asks me, "Who was your mentor?" I have a master's degree, and I did not have a Latino mentor my entire life. So for me, it makes it even more important, yes, to find to find people, to find schools like that for my children, um, and also to be very engaged as a parent as well.
I love that. I see Ms. Nash puts up there that instructional assistants should not just be used as subs. We need to pull their small groups to close the gaps. We have to be intentional about it. I saw that Principal Mickens said, "Hey, leaders, we've got to own it." Mickens, I'm going to say we all have to own it. We all have to own it. My children are adults now, they're gone. And I own this data just as much as every school leader and every teacher that's out there. Yes, Ms. Neal, representation matters. So I do want to name that we have a collective group of individuals that are working here in the city to increase that pipeline of teachers of color. Elliot talked earlier about the intentionality that we're placing now on getting the community more involved and informed. Opportunities like tonight, right, to have these conversations and to be transparent about the data, not to shame, not to shame, but to just bring awareness.
Can we talk about the things that our schools have to celebrate our schools and what they've done right with this, and just talk about examples like that? What are school leaders, what are Indianapolis schools doing right?
Oh, I love talking about this. Let me tell you, we have a large collection of school leaders that have done already what I just said, right? They've established a relationship with their families. They're on this call. First of all, they're on this call. They already know this data, but they want to be connected with what is happening. And the other thing the school leaders are doing is that they're, how because of this teacher shortage, it was really difficult at times for me to reach school leaders because they were teaching classes themselves. They were modeling for teachers. And so if you are in a school and you don't see your school leader throughout the day, that's a problem. That's a problem. We have school leaders that are getting up every single day knowing that no matter what title they hold, they're going to be a resource to their kids when they get there. They're going to be a resource to their teachers when they get there. So there's opportunities that schools have taken to partner with us to get additional executive coaching for their leadership team, to get training for themselves, for their teachers. So there are great things happening. We just need more of it. Let's see. Kim Neal says having teachers that reflect the students we serve allowed us to have double-digit growth for our Latinx students on ILEARN, above state average growth on WIDA. So celebrate, Believe. Thank you, Believe.
And to add what you were saying, Kelly, is that I know with my daughter's school, they actually had like a ILEARN parent night. It was a non-threatening way. It wasn't just about data, 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 but they were also kind of preparing us for how we can prepare our children at home. So doing more programs like that also motivates parents to make sure that they're able to do whatever they need to do at home, like making sure the children are getting to bed on time, making sure that they're have their bellies full. So creating programs like that where it's creating that partnership and creating that oneness with the community will also help our children to be a success.
And something we've had something similar at Empowered Families. There we had a house meeting, and Kelly was there, Doma was there, and we were able to create a safe space for our parents to ask questions, understand the data, own the data. And due to the response of that event, we definitely would like to have more events like that, just to inform parents and give them the space to reflect and give them the space to ask questions, and so that they're able to go to their school leader, their teacher, and be able to be informed and be prepared to have those conversations. And so that's something that we at Empowered Families has done and will continue to do.
I saw a parent put something about more curriculum nights. It kind of went away, but I like that idea.
Mhm.
One, yeah, there it is. Also, we can add more curriculum nights to provide support to our families on what we are doing in the classroom. That's awesome. But having things like that where it's in a non-threatening way for families
Right.
and meeting them where they are motivates families to be more involved.
That's a great point. The
Hmm.
curriculum, let me tell you, parents and those of you already know, the curriculum as we once knew it is a little different, right? And so, to Tiara's point, when we were with parents the other night, we talked about just how, the test has changed, how the thinking and the required thinking has changed over time. And so, parents, you too at home should know what those state standards are. It's on that DOE website. We can make sure that that information is accessible to you as well. But when you're at home, just accessing the information that your teachers also have access to. We've got a lot of stuff popping up now. Let's see. Communicating with families about the assessments and curriculum that we use, aligned to the rigor and expectations of grade levels. Yes. So let's see. We are at 6:28. We've got a couple more minutes. This has been a great conversation. So let's see if we have time for maybe one more question, or instead, let's go ahead and let's have some final thoughts from our panelists.
Sure. I can start. I think for me, it's so important to engage um, the parents, but to also have the academic rigor to find, ways to build relationships with the community and finding maybe that community gatekeeper. Figure out what is your location and who are those gatekeepers. Um, and just school and family relations are incredibly important to build trust and um, trust in our community. And I think that also, um, culturally having the culturally competent school personnel, not just the teachers, but also the school personnel, trained school personnel with working with a specific population. Those were just some of the things, trusting relationships and high expectations that I think will make a big difference.
Yeah, I we had it on the slide. I probably will try to remember some of those, but I often like to provide parents with next steps because when you have all this information, it can be overwhelming. But when you actually walk out those steps, it's like, okay, give me a toolkit. So I like in the other slides you had put, Kelly, is about how do you approach your child's teacher? What do you say? So I like those steps given parents. So when they enter into the school year and we get to the point of ILEARN, they can say, okay, well, what is my child's strengths? How can I help them at home? Are you providing them an opportunity to be on a grade level? So those are questions that parents need to be equipped. So when they go to the school, they'll feel empowered to be able to advocate for their child.
For me, what's coming to mind is how do we make sure that this isn't the last conversation that is had? And I know the people that are watching, the parents, school leaders, teachers, how do we continue creating these spaces so that parents can continue being more equipped and school leaders can continue to learn about how to engage with parents? And that's something that's coming to mind for me, and how we at Empowered Families would love to serve in that way.
Wow, this has been a powerful conversation. To all of you that have logged on, to the questions, to our panelists, and to all of the folks behind the scenes, I really appreciate this opportunity to just share with you our 2022 ILEARN results. And remember, ask questions behind what's behind the data, not just what's provided in front of us to the media. More information regarding this can be found at themindtrust.org/news. Thank you.